The Democratic Party traces its roots back to the 1820s, with Andrew Jackson as its fiery leader. Jackson, a man of the people, was known for his fiery temper and strong will. He was a war hero, having led American forces to victory in the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812. His leadership style and policies would come to define the early Democratic Party. Jackson, a war hero and champion of the common man, believed in a smaller federal government and greater states' rights. He argued that a strong central government could become tyrannical and infringe upon the liberties of the people. Jackson's vision was one where the power remained closer to the people, particularly benefiting the agrarian society that made up much of the United States at the time. His opponents, largely composed of wealthy businessmen and northern elites, formed the Whig Party. The Whigs were a coalition of various groups who were united in their opposition to Jackson's policies. They believed that a strong national government was necessary to foster economic growth and stability. The Whigs drew support from those who were invested in commerce and industry, as well as those who feared the populist tendencies of Jacksonian democracy. The Whigs favored a strong national government and policies that promoted economic development. They supported the creation of a national bank, which they believed would stabilize the currency and provide a reliable source of credit for businesses. They also advocated for protective tariffs to shield American industries from foreign competition, and for federal funding of internal improvements such as roads, canals, and railroads. These early years were marked by intense debates over tariffs, banking, and internal improvements. The Democrats, led by Jackson, were staunchly opposed to the national bank, which they saw as a tool of the wealthy elite. They also opposed high tariffs, which they believed unfairly burdened Southern farmers who relied on imported goods. The Whigs, on the other hand, argued that these measures were essential for the nation's economic growth and prosperity. The Democrats, with their base among farmers and laborers, opposed policies they saw as benefiting the wealthy. They believed that the government's role should be limited and that individuals should be free to pursue their own economic interests without interference. This populist approach resonated with many Americans who felt marginalized by the rapid industrialization and economic changes of the time. The Whigs, on the other hand, supported these policies, arguing they were essential for national growth. They believed that a strong national government could create the conditions necessary for economic development and that this would ultimately benefit all Americans. The Whigs saw themselves as the party of progress and modernization, advocating for policies that would help the United States compete on the global stage. The two parties also clashed on social issues. The Democrats generally favored a hands-off approach, believing that individuals should be free to make their own choices without government interference. This included issues such as temperance, where Democrats were more likely to oppose government-imposed restrictions on alcohol consumption. Democrats generally favored a hands-off approach, while Whigs were more likely to support moral reforms like temperance. The Whigs believed that the government had a role to play in promoting moral behavior and improving society. They supported various reform movements, including temperance, which sought to reduce alcohol consumption and its associated social problems. This reflected the Whigs' belief in the power of government to shape a better society. These early ideological divisions would continue to shape the two parties in the decades to come. The debates between the Democrats and Whigs laid the groundwork for many of the political conflicts that would define American politics in the 19th century. As the nation grew and changed, these two parties would continue to evolve, but the fundamental differences in their visions for America would remain a central theme in the country's political landscape. The issue of slavery would ultimately shatter the existing political order. This contentious issue, deeply rooted in the economic, social, and moral fabric of the nation, created a rift that could no longer be ignored or patched over with temporary compromises. As the nation expanded westward, the question of whether slavery should be allowed in new territories became increasingly divisive. The Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 were temporary measures that attempted to balance the interests of free and slave states, but they only postponed the inevitable conflict. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which allowed new territories to decide the issue of slavery for themselves, further inflamed tensions and led to violent confrontations known as Bleeding Kansas. The Whig Party, unable to reconcile its pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions, collapsed in the 1850s. This disintegration was a reflection of the broader national crisis as political leaders struggled to find common ground on the issue of slavery. The Whigs had been a major political force, but their inability to address the slavery question led to their downfall. From its ashes rose the Republican Party, a new political force united in its opposition to slavery. Founded in 1854, the Republican Party quickly gained traction by appealing to a coalition of anti-slavery activists, former Whigs and Free Soilers. Their platform was built on the principle that slavery should not be allowed to expand into the Western territories, a stance that resonated with many Northerners who were concerned about the spread of slavery and its implications for free labor. The Republicans drew support from former Whigs, anti-slavery Democrats, and members of the Abolitionist Liberty Party. This diverse coalition was united by a common goal: to prevent the spread of slavery and promote a vision of America where free labor could thrive. The party's message was bolstered by the growing abolitionist movement, which highlighted the moral and humanitarian arguments against slavery. In 1860, the Republican Party nominated Abraham Lincoln, a little-known lawyer from Illinois, as its presidential candidate. Lincoln's eloquence and moderate stance on slavery made him an appealing choice for a party seeking to broaden its appeal. His debates with Stephen Douglas during the Illinois Senate race had brought him national attention, and his views on slavery, while firm, were seen as pragmatic and measured. Lincoln's election without carrying a single Southern state proved to be the final straw. The Southern states saw his victory as a direct threat to their way of life and their economic interests, which were deeply tied to the institution of slavery. The election results underscored the deep sectional divide in the country, with Lincoln winning the northern states while the southern states overwhelmingly supported other candidates. 11 southern states seceded from the Union, leading to the Civil War. The secession was a dramatic and unprecedented move, driven by the belief that the southern states could no longer coexist with a federal government that was increasingly dominated by anti-slavery sentiments. The formation of the Confederate States of America marked the beginning of a bloody and protracted conflict that would test the very foundations of the United States. The war would not only determine the fate of slavery, but also reshape the political landscape of the nation. The Civil War was a turning point in American history, leading to the eventual abolition of slavery and the redefinition of federal and state relationships. The Republican Party, under Lincoln's leadership, emerged as the dominant political force, committed to preserving the Union and promoting a vision of equality and freedom. The legacy of this era continues to influence American politics and society to this day. The Civil War ended with the defeat of the Confederacy and the abolition of slavery. The period that followed, known as Reconstruction, was a time of dramatic change and upheaval. Republicans, now firmly in control of the federal government, sought to rebuild the South and integrate formerly enslaved people into American society. They passed a series of amendments to the Constitution, guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection under the law to all Americans, regardless of race. Republicans also established freedmen's bureaus to provide education, healthcare, and other assistance to formerly enslaved people. These efforts were met with fierce resistance from white Southerners, many of whom resented the federal government's intrusion into their affairs. The Democratic Party, now largely relegated to the South, became the party of white supremacy, opposing Reconstruction and seeking to restore the old order. The turn of the 20th century saw the rise of industrialization and urbanization, transforming the American landscape and economy. Factories sprang up, cities expanded, and people flocked to urban areas in search of jobs and new opportunities. However, this rapid growth brought with it new challenges and social problems. Overcrowded neighborhoods, poor working conditions, and economic disparities became increasingly apparent. The Republican Party, now firmly associated with big business and laissez-faire economics, championed policies that favored industrialists and the wealthy elite. They believed that minimal government intervention would allow the economy to thrive. Yet this approach struggled to address the growing gap between the rich and the poor. While the affluent enjoyed unprecedented prosperity, many Americans faced dire poverty and limited opportunities. The Great Depression, which began in 1929, marked a catastrophic turning point. The stock market crash sent shockwaves through the economy, leading to widespread financial ruin. The economic collapse devastated the nation, leaving millions unemployed and desperate. Breadlines and soup kitchens became common sights as people struggled to survive. The stock market crash and subsequent economic collapse devastated the nation, causing businesses to close and streets to empty. The once thriving economy was now in shambles. Millions of Americans found themselves without jobs, homes, or hope. Shantytowns, known as Hoovervilles, sprang up across the country as people sought shelter wherever they could. The Republican Party, led by President Herbert Hoover, faced mounting criticism for their handling of the crisis. Hoover's policies were seen as ineffective and out of touch with the needs of the suffering populace. As the situation worsened, protests against Hoover's administration grew. Many Americans felt that the government was failing to provide meaningful relief or solutions to the economic disaster. In 1932, Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected president, offering a message of hope and change. His campaign promised a new deal for the American people, aiming to restore confidence and rebuild the economy. Roosevelt's election was met with widespread celebration and optimism. His inauguration marked the beginning of a new era in American politics, one that would prioritize the needs of the common people. Roosevelt's New Deal programs, which included Social Security, unemployment insurance, and massive public works projects, sought to provide immediate relief and long-term economic stability. These initiatives not only offered financial support to those in need, but also created jobs and improved infrastructure. Workers across the nation participated in projects that built roads, schools, and other essential facilities. Roosevelt's New Deal fundamentally reshaped the role of the federal government in American life. It established a precedent for government intervention in the economy and social welfare, laying the groundwork for future reforms and protections. The New Deal coalition, a diverse group of voters, including labor unions, minorities, and the working class, rallied behind Roosevelt's vision. This coalition would dominate American politics for decades, shaping the nation's policies and priorities. Through the New Deal, Roosevelt aimed to restore faith in the American dream. His programs provided a safety net for the vulnerable and helped to rebuild the economy from the ground up. Roosevelt's leadership extended beyond policy. His fireside chats, broadcasted over the radio, connected him directly with the American people, offering reassurance and fostering a sense of unity during challenging times. The New Deal era was characterized by a spirit of collective effort and resilience. Communities came together to support one another, and the federal government played a crucial role in guiding the nation through its darkest days. The legacy of the New Deal is still felt today. It not only helped to lift the country out of the Great Depression, but also set the stage for future social and economic reforms that continue to shape American society